far north of Scotland, a fragment of the ancient Laurentian continent limited to its southeast by much younger geology, the roots of the Caledonian mountain belt. The edge, or front, of the Caledonian rocks is a major fault zone called the Moine Thrust. It has ploughed up rocks of Laurentia into spectacular structures, faults and folds. And a great place to appreciate this is up in the far north, at Loch Eriboll. Here, looking south, we see the sedimentary cover of Laurentia, which are Cambrian quartz sandstones gently dipping, simply tilted, then becoming crumpled up like tectonic waves as they approach the Moine Thrust. We're at the head of Loch Eriboll, here in the very north of Scotland, and this is the edge of the Caledonian mountain belt on mainland Scotland. It's a really fantastic area, and for me it's something of a pilgrimage back to my youth, because it was here that I did my undergraduate mapping many years ago. Anyway, up on that ground are some really spectacular structures. Let's go and discover them together. The snowy hills in the distance contain the Moine Thrust, but our targets today are the crumpled rocks that lie ahead, that's west of this thrust, on the nearer ridge line. And to reach these, the first task is to walk a few kilometres up the valley of Strathbeg. Before heading up onto its rocky valley sides. Crazy hot day for March, goodness me. The structures we're going to see are all developed in a rather particular stratigraphic formation with fossil burrows called the pipe rock. So plenty of rock as we go higher on the hill, and it only gets better. Seen on bedding planes, these burrows look like small studs, the end-on view of pipes like bundles of pencils that formed perpendicular to bedding. So the top of the pipe rock, which is where we are now, is this fantastic coarse sediment. It's a storm deposit, and punching through it are these really remarkable donut shapes. And these are escape burrows, and the organisms that make the pipes in the pipe rock being buried by all this sediment and burst their way out, leaving behind these escape structures like sort of mini volcanoes punching through the sediment. Really nice. Well, that's the front peak of the ridge of Finehaven, another valley over, and we'll look at the sidewall of that later on as we continue our walk. But just over this little brow here, there's a really nice little structure to get us going. So this is a fold pair in the hanging wall to a thrust, and the outcrop gives us a 3D view. And we can even walk along the hinge line of the fold. So, a really nice folded bedding plane. It's actually made up of this rather spectacular rock, which is a burrowed quartz sandstone. And this whole hillside is made up of stacked pipe rock.
The stratigraphic thickness was only about 75 or 80 meters, and it stacked up again and again and again. So let's continue our exploration through these wonderful outcrops up here, and we'll see other scales of thrusting. Some really great outcrops. So this is the top end of Strath Beg. The ridge continues, and you can see these ridges of pipe rock quartzite stacked up again and again as you go back. Eventually, back where that loch is at the back of the valley there, that's finally where you get to the Moine Thrust. So a huge stack of imbricated pipe rock quartz sandstones.
So the pipe rock has been stacked up beneath the Moine Thrust by an array of thrusts, making entire mountainsides of thrust slices. These are the northern cliffs of the mountain ridge of Foinaven. This is what structural geologists call duplex structure. And Foinaven is one of the most famous examples of duplexes in the world.
Our next mission is to go down into one of these gullies down in here and to look at a smaller scale of thrusting where individual beds rather than great thick packages are stacked together. Down here. So this is a fault plane, and I know that because this yellow mottling you can see on the surface is fault gouge, very fine rock flour. So here we see a good example of the yellow mottling. Well, it's a veneer of pasty, very fine grained, milled quartzite. It's a fault gouge, cataclysite, formed by grinding up the sedimentary grains into rock flour, and now it's been lithified into this really tough stuff on the fault plane. Well, this is a really cool structure, isn't it? So here's the fault plane, bedding plane that we saw with the yellow mottling, and above it is a pile of stacked little slices that are involved in, well, maybe this bed here. It's only a few centimetres thick, stacked up again and again, and you can see the overriding stack of quartz sandstone is bulged up. So that's the roof thrust that's folded by the stacking of the slices underneath. Really neat little example of a duplex. So we've got imbrication on the scale of many meters, tens of meters of units, and we've also got here imbrication on the scale of a few centimeters. So it's not just imbrication on the scale of a few centimeters, there's also imbrication of several meters of pipe rock stratigraphy, and you can see it here piling up off this floor thrust here, stacking up imbricates, peeling up the quartzites, stacking them up on top of each other. But if you look really carefully down in the back in there, you can see that there's also another one of these little duplexes formed by imbrication of just a few centimeters of pipe rock. So imbrication on all scales on this hillside down here on the southern end of Loch Eriboll. But how do these slices and stacking within the pipe rock relate to the highest thrusts within the Moine Thrust Belt? Well, to answer that question, we need to look to the other side of the valley.
The crag opposite tops out at 359 metres above sea level, and here we can see around 300 metres of cliff section. This view is looking almost back down the thrusting direction, so thrust sheets were coming obliquely out towards you. So zooming in, these rocks were carried by a major thrust that maps out like this, carrying old gneiss and quartz sandstones, and it's folded. So too is a higher structure, the Moine Thrust. So what's folded these thrusts? Well, below are stacked Cambrian rocks. That's one duplex, but it too is bulged up, this time by a stack of pipe rock. Let's look at the internal structure of the pipe rock duplex. The visible cliff here is about 50 metres high, and each band of rock is its own thin thrust slice. Collectively, these bulge each other up to make a domal structure. It's what we call an antiformal stack duplex.
It's a thrust sheet that's been carried up and bulged by the piles of stacked quartz sandstones that we can see over there. It's bulged up and folded by the piling up of these thrust stacks. It's a really great example of where we can use the thrust geometries to tell us something about the sequence of thrusting. Clearly the gneiss carrying and Moine thrusts are basically early, and the underlying imbrication postdates that, and that's why these higher thrusts are folded up and bulged by these underlying imbricate systems. Well, some fantastic geology here at the southern end of Loch Eriboll. Imbrication, bulging up higher thrust sheets. It's a great place to come and study thrust tectonics in northern Scotland. Right, I think our work here is done. Time to walk back to the car.